The citation from the Pinehaven Estates Homeowners Association arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday morning, wedged between a grocery store flyer and my water bill. And I knew immediately that my peaceful life in suburban Ohio was about to get complicated. I stood there in my driveway, still holding my coffee mug, reading the letter with growing disbelief. The HOA was demanding that I mow my front lawn within 72 hours or face a fine of $100 per day. The problem was, I did not have a lawn anymore. I had a wildflower meadow, and I had absolutely no intention of cutting it down. My name is Oliver Ortiz, and 6 months earlier, I had made what seemed like a simple decision. After years of spending every Saturday morning pushing a mower around my quarter-acre lot, breathing in gasoline fumes and watching butterflies disappear from the neighborhood, I decided to do something different. I researched native Ohio wildflowers, bought 15 pounds of seeds, and spent a weekend preparing the soil. By spring, my front yard had transformed into a riot of color: purple coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, wild bergamot, and milkweed. The bees loved it. The butterflies came back. Even the hummingbirds showed up. My neighbors had mixed reactions. The Hendersons next door thought it was beautiful. Old Mr. Peterson across the street gave me a thumbs up every time he walked his dog past my house. But apparently, someone had complained to the HOA, and now I was holding the evidence. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office. A woman answered on the third ring with a clipped, professional tone. "Pinehaven Estates, HOA, this is Brenda." "Hi, this is Oliver Ortiz from 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. I just received a citation about my lawn and I think there has been a misunderstanding. Hold please." The line went silent for a moment, then she came back. "Yes, Mr. Ortiz, the citation is correct. Your front yard is in violation of Section 4.2 of the HOA Covenant, which requires all lawns to be maintained at a height not exceeding 4 inches. "Right, but I do not have a lawn anymore. I planted a native wildflower meadow. It is actually better for the environment and requires less water and no chemicals." "That is not relevant to the covenant, Mr. Ortiz. The rules state that front yards must be maintained as traditional lawns. You will need to remove the wildflowers and resod the area." I felt my jaw tighten. "Can I speak to someone on the board about this? Maybe we can work something out." "The board meets the first Tuesday of every month. You are welcome to submit a request to speak, but the earliest opening would be next month. In the meantime, the citation stands, and fines will begin accumulating if you do not comply within the 72-hour window." This is ridiculous. Native plants are legal in Ohio. The state has actually been promoting them. HOA covenants supersede state recommendations, Mr. Ortiz. "Have a good day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there staring at my phone, anger bubbling up in my chest. I had moved to Pinehaven Estates 3 years ago because the neighborhood seemed quiet and friendly. The HOA fees were reasonable, and I had not paid much attention to the endless pages of covenants I had signed at closing. Like most people, I had assumed they were just basic rules about not painting your house purple or parking boats in the driveway. I had not realized I was signing away my right to make environmentally responsible choices on my own property. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of whiskey and my laptop, reading through the entire HOA covenant document. It was 73 pages of dense legal language, and by page 20 my eyes were crossing. But I kept going, looking for any loophole, any exception that might apply to my situation. Section 4.2 was pretty clear about lawn maintenance, but Section 4.7 had an interesting clause about landscaping modifications. It stated that homeowners could request approval for alternative landscaping if it maintains or enhances property values and aesthetic cohesion of the neighborhood. That was subjective enough to work with. I drafted a formal request to the HOA board, complete with research studies about the benefits of native wildflower meadows, photos of my yard showing how healthy and intentional it looked, and property value data from neighborhoods with similar naturalized landscapes. I even included letters of support from the Hendersons and Mr. Peterson. I sent it via certified mail the next morning. The 72 hours came and went. I did not mow. On the fourth day, another letter arrived. The daily fines had begun. I was now being charged $100 per day, retroactive to the day after the original deadline. I called my lawyer, a guy named Steve who had handled my house closing. HOAs are tough, Steve said, after I explained the situation. They have a lot of legal power and courts generally side with them as long as they are applying their rules consistently. So what are my options? You can pay the fines and comply, or you can fight it. Fighting it means potentially going to court, which gets expensive. You would need to prove that the HOA is being unreasonable or applying rules inconsistently. What if I can show that native meadows are better for the environment and the community? That is a nice argument, but HOAs are not required to care about that. They are required to enforce their covenants. Your best bet is to get the board to amend the rules or grant you a specific exception. And if they refuse, then it gets messy. But Oliver, I have to be honest with you. Most people who fight their HOA end up losing and paying a lot more in legal fees than the original fines would have cost. I thanked Steve and hung up, feeling the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. But I could not shake the feeling that this was wrong. I was not doing anything harmful. In fact, I was doing something good. Why should I be punished for that? The next day, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a sharp female voice said, "Mr. Ortiz, this is Patricia Mason. I am the president of the Pinehaven Estates HOA board." Here it was. I recognized the tone immediately. This was going to be difficult. "Hello, Mrs. Mason. I am glad you called. Did you receive my request for a landscaping exception?" "I did, and I want to be clear with you right now. The board will not be granting your request. Your front yard is an eyesore, and several of your neighbors have complained. We have standards in this neighborhood, and those standards include properly maintained lawns. With respect, Mrs. Mason, my yard is not an eyesore. It is a carefully planned native meadow. I have letters from neighbors who support it. You also have neighbors who do not. And frankly, what you have done is not acceptable. It looks messy and unkempt. This is not some rural farmhouse. This is a planned community. The wildflowers are native to Ohio. They provide habitat for pollinators, reduce water usage, and eliminate the need for pesticides and fertilizers that run off into our local waterways. This is about being responsible. This is about following the rules you agreed to when you bought your home, Mr. Ortiz. I suggest you get a mower and fix this situation before your fines become truly unmanageable. Good day." She hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling the anger rise again. Patricia Mason had not even considered my points. She had already made up her mind, and nothing I said was going to change it. Over the next week, the fines accumulated. $700, then $800. I received threatening letters almost daily, each one more aggressive than the last. The HOA was demanding immediate payment and immediate compliance. They threatened to place a lien on my property if I did not pay. I decided to take my story public. I had been documenting my wildflower meadow since I planted it, taking photos every few weeks to track its growth, and the wildlife it attracted. I had hundreds of pictures of bees on the coneflowers, butterflies on the milkweed, and goldfinches eating the seeds. I put together a post explaining the situation and shared it on social media. My HOA is fining me $100/day because I replaced my lawn with native wildflowers, I wrote. They say it is an eyesore. What do you think? I included a dozen photos showing my yard in full bloom, alive with color and movement. I posted it to my personal accounts and to a few gardening and environmental groups I followed. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the post had been shared hundreds of times. People were outraged. They called the HOA ridiculous, called Patricia Mason a tyrant, and praised my meadow as beautiful and responsible. A local news station reached out asking if they could do a story. I said yes. The reporter, a young woman named Jennifer Kim, came to my house 2 days later with a cameraman. She interviewed me in my front yard with the wildflowers swaying behind me in the breeze. I explained the whole situation, the citation, the fines, the refusal to even consider an exception. I talked about the environmental benefits and showed her the bees and butterflies that were constantly visiting. What do you say to people who might agree with the HOA that this does look messy? Jennifer asked. I would say that our idea of what looks good has been shaped by a lawn care industry that profits from us spending time, money, and resources on grass monocultures that provide almost no ecological value. A lawn like this, a native meadow, might look different from the manicured grass we are used to, but it is not messy. It is natural. It is what this land looked like before we covered it in concrete and Kentucky bluegrass. The story aired that evening on the local news. My phone started blowing up. Friends I had not talked to in years were texting me. My sister called from California to tell me she was proud of me, and the social media post continued to spread. By the next morning, it had gone viral, not just locally but nationally. The post had been shared tens of thousands of times. News outlets across the country were picking up the story. My email inbox was flooded with messages of support, interview requests, and offers of help from environmental organizations. A lawyer from the Ohio Native Plant Society reached out, offering to represent me pro bono. Her name was Deanna Chen, and she specialized in environmental law. We talked on the phone for an hour, and she explained that Ohio had actually passed legislation a few years earlier protecting homeowners' rights to plant native species. The law stated that HOAs could not prohibit native plants unless they could demonstrate a legitimate safety or property value concern. This is exactly the kind of case the law was designed to address, Deanna said. Your HOA is on shaky legal ground. If they push this, we can push back hard. What should I do? Keep documenting everything. Do not mow. Do not pay the fines yet. Let me send them a letter explaining the legal situation. If they are smart, they will back down. If they are not, we will take them to court and we will win. Hope flickered in my chest for the first time in weeks. Maybe this was going to be okay. Diana sent the letter. The HOA responded with a letter of their own, doubling down on their position. They claimed the Ohio native plant law did not apply because their covenants were established before the law was passed. Deanna said that argument would not hold up in court, but the HOA seemed determined to fight. Meanwhile, my story continued to explode online. Environmental activists were using my case as an example of HOA overreach. Gardening influencers were sharing my photos and encouraging their followers to plant their own wildflower meadows. Someone even started a crowdfunding campaign to help with my legal fees, though I had not asked for it. Within 3 days, It had raised over $15,000. The attention was overwhelming. Reporters were showing up at my house unannounced. My neighbors were being interviewed. The HOA office was reportedly getting hundreds of angry calls and emails. Patricia Mason was not talking to the media, but someone leaked her personal cell phone number online, and according to rumors, she was getting harassed. I felt bad about that part. I had not wanted anyone to be harassed. I just wanted to keep my wildflowers. The HOA scheduled an emergency board meeting, and I was invited to attend. Deanna advised me to go, but to let her do most of the talking. The meeting was held at the community center on a Thursday evening. When I arrived, the parking lot was packed. Apparently, half the neighborhood had shown up. Inside, the meeting room was standing room only. I spotted Patricia Mason at the front table with 4 other board members. She looked stressed, her face tight and her posture rigid. When she saw me, her expression hardened. The meeting started with standard HOA business, approving minutes and discussing budget items. But everyone knew why they were really there. Finally, Patricia called for the discussion about my case. "We are here to address the ongoing situation with Mr. Ortiz at 2847 Maple Ridge Drive," she began, her voice strained. "As you all know, Mr. Ortiz has violated HOA covenants by failing to maintain his lawn. He has accumulated significant fines and has refused to comply with repeated requests to remedy the situation." Deanna stood up. "Madam President, if I may, my name is Diana Chen, and I am representing Mr. Ortiz. I would like to address the board and the community about the legal issues at stake here." Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. "Go ahead." Deanna laid out the case clearly and calmly. She explained the Ohio native plant law, the environmental benefits of native meadows, and the fact that the HOA's refusal to even consider an exception was not only unreasonable but potentially illegal. She cited case law from other states where HOAs had lost similar battles. She pointed out that the negative publicity was harming the community's reputation far more than my wildflowers ever could. "Mr. Ortiz is not trying to undermine this community," Deanna concluded. "He is trying to be a responsible environmental steward on his own property. The law supports his right to do so. I urge the board to rescind the fines and amend your covenants to allow for native plantings." The room erupted in applause. Patricia looked furious. She banged a gavel, calling for order. "Does anyone else wish to speak?" she asked tersely. Hands shot up all over the room. For the next hour, neighbors took turns speaking. Most supported me. Mrs. Henderson talked about how much she loved seeing the butterflies in my yard. Mr. Peterson said he had been inspired to plant some native flowers in his own backyard. A woman I had never met said her kids asked to walk past my house every day because they loved looking at the flowers. But there were dissenters too. A man named Carl stood up and said my yard looked like a vacant lot and was bringing down property values. A woman named Sharon said she had not moved to a nice neighborhood to live next to a field of weeds. Another man said I was being selfish and should just follow the rules like everyone else. Patricia clearly expected more support from the anti-Meadow crowd. She looked increasingly uncomfortable as speaker after speaker defended my wildflowers. Finally, one of the other board members, a younger man named Tom, spoke up. "Patricia, I think we need to seriously consider amending our landscaping rules. The community is clearly divided on this and the legal risk is real. Maybe we can find a compromise." "There is no compromise," Patricia snapped. "The rules are the rules. If we start making exceptions, where does it end?" "It ends with us being reasonable," Tom shot back. "Oliver's yard looks fine. Better than fine, actually. I drove past it on my way here," It is not hurting anyone." Patricia glared at him. The tension in the room was palpable. Another board member, an older woman named Susan, cleared her throat. "I move that we table this issue pending a full review of our landscaping covenants. We should consult with our own lawyer before proceeding." Tom immediately seconded the motion. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but the other two board members nodded in agreement. The motion passed 3-2, with Patricia and one other member voting against it. The meeting ended shortly after. As people filed out, several neighbors came up to shake my hand and wish me luck. Deanna looked satisfied. "That went well," she said. "They are backing down. It might take a few weeks, but I think you are going to win this." I wanted to believe her, but Patricia Mason's expression as she left the meeting told me this was not over. Over the next 2 weeks, the story continued to gain traction. National news outlets picked it up. I was interviewed by NPR, the New York Times, and even a segment on a morning talk show. My Wildflower Meadow became a symbol in a larger conversation about suburban development, environmental responsibility, and HOA overreach. Environmental organizations started using my case in their advocacy work. The Ohio Native Plant Society published a guide for homeowners dealing with similar HOA conflicts. Several states began considering legislation to strengthen protections for native plantings. I also started getting hate mail. Not a lot, but enough to be unsettling. Anonymous letters calling me an entitled troublemaker, a few nasty messages on social media. Someone even threw a bag of garbage in my yard one night, though I had no proof of who did it. The HOA hired a law firm and sent Deanna a letter stating their intention to pursue legal action if I did not comply with the covenants. Deanna responded with a letter of her own, reiterating the legal protections and suggesting that continued harassment could result in a countersuit. Then things took a strange turn. I received a certified letter from the HOA stating that they had conducted an inspection of my property and found additional violations. According to the letter, my mailbox was the wrong color, my house numbers were not properly illuminated, and I had an unapproved structure in my backyard. The unapproved structure was a small compost bin I had been using for 2 years. The mailbox had been that color when I bought the house. And my house numbers were perfectly visible. "They are retaliating," Deanna said when I showed her the letter. "This is a textbook example of targeted enforcement. Have any of your neighbors received similar citations?" "Not that I know of. This helps our case. It shows they are not applying the rules consistently. They are singling you out because you stood up to them." Diana filed a formal complaint with the Ohio Real Estate Commission, alleging harassment and selective enforcement. She also sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding they stop the retaliation. The pressure was clearly getting to Patricia Mason. According to neighborhood gossip, she had become increasingly erratic at board meetings. Tom, the board member who had supported me, told me privately that Patricia was obsessed with my case. She saw it as a personal challenge to her authority and was determined to make me comply, regardless of the cost or consequences. "She is not thinking clearly," Tom said. "Some of us have tried to talk sense into her, but she will not listen. I am honestly worried she is going to do something that gets the HOA sued." His words proved prophetic. One Saturday morning, I woke up to a strange sound outside. I looked out my bedroom window and saw a pickup truck parked in front of my house. 2 men with a mower and other equipment were walking toward my yard. I threw on clothes and ran outside. "Hey, what are you doing?" One of the men, a heavy-set guy in a work shirt, looked uncomfortable. "We were hired by the HOA to mow this lawn. They said the homeowner was not complying." "You cannot do that. This is my property. You do not have permission to be here. Look, man, we are just doing our job. We got a work order and we got paid. I do not care. You are not touching my yard. Get off my property right now or I am calling the police." The men looked at each other, clearly uncertain. The second man pulled out his phone and made a call. After a brief conversation, he hung up and shook his head. "Our contact says we have authorization from the HOA and we are supposed to proceed. I am the property owner and I am telling you no. That supersedes whatever the HOA told you." I pulled out my own phone and dialed 911. "I need police at 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. Someone is trespassing on my property and threatening to destroy my landscaping." That got their attention. The men backed away, hands up. All right, we are leaving. This is not worth the trouble." They loaded their equipment back into the truck and drove off. My hands were shaking. I called Diana and explained what had happened. "That is illegal," she said immediately. "The HOA cannot send people onto your property without your permission to alter your landscaping. That is destruction of property and, depending on how you want to play it, potentially trespassing and vandalism." "Did you get the name of the company?" I had taken photos of the truck, including the company name on the side. "Good. We are filing a police report and adding this to our case. Oliver, this is actually good for us. They just handed us proof of malicious intent." I filed a police report that afternoon. The officer who took my statement looked sympathetic, but explained that since the men had left when asked, and no actual damage had been done, there was not much the police could do immediately. But he gave me a case number and said the report would be on file. The story hit the news that evening. "HOA attempts to forcibly mow homeowner's Wildflower Meadow," read the headline. The backlash was swift and intense. The landscaping company issued a statement saying they had been misled by the HOA about having proper authorization and would not be returning. The HOA's law firm quietly withdrew from the case. 2 days later, Tom called me. "There is going to be an emergency board meeting tomorrow night. Patricia is being asked to resign. I thought you would want to know." "What happened?" "A bunch of homeowners signed a petition calling for her removal. Between the bad publicity, the legal liability, and the stunt with the landscapers, the other board members have had enough. She has been making decisions without board approval, spending HOA funds on this vendetta against you. It is a mess." The meeting was even more packed than the last one. Patricia Mason sat at the board table looking pale and defeated. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and she would not make eye contact with anyone. The meeting began with a motion for a vote of no confidence in Patricia's leadership. The vote was not even close. Even the board member who had sided with her before voted for her removal. Patricia was out as HOA president, effective immediately. Susan, the older board member who had suggested tabling the issue weeks ago, was elected as the new president. Her first act was to address my case. "On behalf of the board, I want to apologize to Mr. Ortiz for the way this situation has been handled," she said, her voice steady and sincere. "What happened was wrong on multiple levels. We are going to rescind all fines against Mr. Ortiz, and we are going to work with legal counsel to amend our covenants to allow for native plant landscaping, subject to reasonable guidelines." The room erupted in applause. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Susan continued. "We also want to make it clear that selective enforcement and retaliation will not be tolerated by this board. The HOA is supposed to serve the community, not bully individual homeowners. We have a lot of work to do to rebuild trust, but we are committed to doing it." After the meeting, Susan approached me privately. "Oliver, I am truly sorry. Patricia became fixated on your case in a way that was not healthy." She saw your refusal to comply as a personal insult, and she lost perspective. It should never have gone this far. I appreciate that, I said. I never wanted any of this to turn into a war. I just wanted to keep my flowers. And you should. Your yard is lovely. My grandkids keep asking when we can plant flowers like yours. Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal. The HOA formally dropped all fines and citations against me. Deanna and I worked with Susan and the new board to draft reasonable guidelines for native plantings. The new rules required that native meadows be clearly intentional, maintained to prevent invasive species, and limited to front yard areas of no more than 75% to ensure some traditional landscaping remained. It was a fair compromise. My wildflower meadow remained intact, and as summer progressed, it became even more spectacular. Photographers started showing up asking to take pictures. A local elementary school teacher brought her class by for a lesson on pollinators. The story evolved from a conflict into a positive example of community change. I gave several talks at garden clubs and environmental groups about native landscaping and dealing with HOA restrictions. I was contacted by homeowners from across the country facing similar battles with their HOAs, and I tried to help where I could by sharing what I had learned. Patricia Mason, I heard, moved out of the neighborhood a few months later. I never spoke to her again after that final board meeting. Part of me felt bad for her. She had clearly invested too much of her identity in her role as HOA president, and when someone challenged that authority, she had not known how to handle it. But I also could not forget that she had tried to destroy something beautiful out of spite and stubbornness. As fall approached, the wildflowers began to set seed. I let them stand through the winter, providing food and shelter for birds and beneficial insects. Neighbors walking by often stopped to comment on the goldfinches that flocked to the dried seed heads. The following spring, several other homeowners in the neighborhood applied for approval to plant their own native meadows. The new HOA board approved every request. Within 2 years, Pinehaven Estates had a dozen wildflower yards, and the neighborhood gained a reputation as an environmentally progressive community. Property values, contrary to the dire predictions, actually increased. The crowdfunding campaign that had been started to help with legal fees had raised over $23,000. Since my legal representation had been pro bono and the HOA had dropped their case, I did not need the money for its intended purpose. I worked with Deanna and the Ohio Native Plant Society to establish a grant program for homeowners facing similar HOA conflicts over native landscaping. The fund would provide legal support and educational resources. Local nurseries reported a significant increase in native plant sales. Environmental organizations credited my case with raising awareness about the ecological importance of native landscaping. A few progressive HOAs in Ohio even began actively encouraging native plantings in their communities. I received letters and emails from people all over the country telling me I had inspired them to plant their own wildflower meadows or to stand up to unreasonable HOA rules. A teacher in Oregon sent me photos of a school garden her students had planted after learning about my story. A retired couple in Texas transformed their entire yard into a native prairie and sent me a thank you note. The experience changed my relationship with my home and my community. I had always thought of my house as just a place to live, separate from the larger ecosystem around it. But creating and defending my wildflower meadow made me understand that every yard, every small piece of land matters. The choices we make about our landscapes have ripple effects on the environment, on wildlife, on our neighbors, and on the broader conversation about how we live on this planet. It also taught me something about standing up for what you believe is right, even when it is difficult and scary. There were times during the conflict when I wanted to give up, to just mow the yard and be done with it. The stress, the legal threats, the confrontations, it all took a toll. But every time I looked out at my wildflowers, at the bees and butterflies and birds they supported, I knew I was fighting for something that mattered. The viral nature of the story had been both a blessing and a curse. The public support had been crucial in pressuring the HOA to back down, but the loss of privacy and the constant attention had been exhausting. I learned to be more careful about what I shared online and to set boundaries with the media. Diana remained a friend and occasional advisor. She used the case in her environmental law practice as an example of how public pressure and strategic legal action could create positive change. She also worked with lawmakers to strengthen protections for homeowners who wanted to make environmentally responsible choices on their property. Tom, the board member who had supported me, became a good friend. We had lunch regularly, and he kept me updated on HOA matters. Under Susan's leadership, the board became more transparent and responsive to homeowner concerns. Several other unnecessary or outdated rules were revised or eliminated. The community felt more relaxed, less controlled. One afternoon in late summer, about 18 months after the whole ordeal had begun, I was sitting on my front porch with a beer, watching the butterflies in my meadow. A car pulled up, and a woman I did not recognize got out with 2 kids. "Are you Oliver?" she asked. "I am. I am sorry to bother you. We drove an hour to see your yard. My kids learned about it at their summer camp and they begged me to bring them. Would it be okay if they looked at the flowers for a minute?" "Of course," I said, smiling. The kids, maybe 8 and 10 years old, walked slowly through the meadow, pointing at butterflies and bees. Their mother took photos. After a few minutes, they came back to the porch. "Thank you so much," the mother said. "We have been talking about doing something like this at our house. Your story really inspired us." "That is wonderful," I said. "If you need any advice on getting started, I am happy to help." She thanked me again and they left. I sat back down, feeling a sense of contentment I had not felt in a long time. This was what it had all been for. Not the viral fame or the legal victory, but this: inspiring other people to make better choices, to create small oases of life in their own yards. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the swaying flowers, I thought about how far things had come. My simple decision to plant wildflowers instead of grass had turned into a months-long battle, a viral sensation, and ultimately, a catalyst for change in my community and beyond. The meadow would go dormant again in the fall, and I would leave the dead stalks standing through the winter. Then, in spring, it would come back even more vibrant than before. The perennials would spread, the ecosystem would mature, and the cycles would continue. I had learned that sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to accept that things have to be done the way they have always been done. That standing up to arbitrary rules and powerful institutions is not only possible but necessary. And that one person with a clear conscience and a willingness to fight for what is right can create ripples that spread far beyond what they ever imagined. My wildflower meadow had become more than just a yard. It had become a statement, a movement, and a reminder that we all have the power to change our small corner of the world for the better. And sometimes, that is enough to inspire others to do the same. The following year brought unexpected recognition. The National Wildlife Federation gave me an award for promoting pollinator habitat in urban environments. I was invited to speak at a conference on sustainable landscaping in Portland. A documentary filmmaker contacted me about including my story in a film about the native plant movement, but the most meaningful moments were the quiet ones. Sitting on my porch on summer evenings, listening to the hum of bees, watching monarch butterflies lay eggs on the milkweed, seeing my neighbor's kids running through their own newly planted meadows. These were the moments that reminded me why I had fought so hard. The HOA, under Susan's continued leadership, became a model for other communities. They published their revised landscaping guidelines online, and HOAs from across the country reached out asking for advice on implementing similar changes. Pinehaven Estates was featured in a national magazine article about progressive HOA policies. I eventually expanded my own meadow into the backyard, creating paths through it so I could walk among the flowers. I added a small pond that attracted frogs and dragonflies. My property became a certified wildlife habitat, and I gave occasional tours to school groups and garden clubs. The experience also sparked my interest in local environmental advocacy. I joined the city's sustainability committee and helped draft a resolution encouraging native landscaping on public properties. The city planted native meadows in several parks and along highway medians. The changes were small but visible, and they added up. Looking back, I realized that the whole conflict could have been avoided if the HOA had just been willing to listen and consider new ideas. But Patricia Mason's rigid adherence to outdated rules and her unwillingness to compromise had turned a simple request into a battle that ended with her resignation and a complete rewrite of the HOA's landscaping policies. In the end, everyone except Patricia had benefited from the outcome. The community had become more environmentally conscious, property values had increased, and homeowners had more freedom to make responsible landscaping choices. The legal precedent had helped other homeowners facing similar conflicts. And my meadow continued to thrive, a living testament to the power of standing firm in your convictions. I never did pay those fines. The HOA officially forgave them as part of the settlement. The total had reached over $3,000 before the board finally backed down. That money stayed in my pocket, and I used some of it to buy more native plants. Years later, when I eventually decided to sell the house and move to a smaller place, the real estate agent told me the meadow was a major selling point. Young families touring the property loved it. The house sold in 3 days for above asking price. The new owners promised to maintain the wildflowers, and as far as I know, they kept that promise. My story became a case study in environmental law classes and HOA management courses. Diana used it in presentations to demonstrate the importance of reasonable accommodation and the legal risks of rigid enforcement. Landscaping companies cited it as an example of changing attitudes toward yard maintenance. But for me, it was always about something simpler. It was about looking out my window every morning and seeing something beautiful and alive. It was about making a choice that felt right and refusing to back down when someone told me I was wrong. It was about believing that my small patch of land could make a difference, and then watching that belief become reality as others followed my example. The wildflower meadow that started a movement began with a handful of seeds and a willingness to imagine something different. It grew into a symbol of environmental responsibility, personal freedom, and the power of community action. And it reminded me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to mow your lawn.